So let's get a little further into the taking of notes in our book for lesson 4.5, which is going back to the idea of the coordinate plane. So once again, as we talk about the coordinate plane, then we're talking about having ordered pairs, sets of numbers that will tell us how to plot them on the x and y axis. Once again, the x-axis is our horizontal one, and it will tell us to either run forward or run backwards, depending on if it's positive or negative. If it's positive, we run forward. If it's negative, we run backwards. Our second number is our y-axis, and that is our vertical line. So it's going to tell us to either jump up or jump down. If it is positive, we jump up. If it is negative, we jump down. So every time we look at our ordered pairs, then we should be able to determine, is that going to be in quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4? Once again, we start in the top right-hand side where everything is positive, positive, and that is our quadrant 1. So any ordered pair that has a positive followed by a positive, that tells us that we're going to be in quadrant 1. Fill that in your book, please. Then when I go straight across, so upper left, that is my quadrant 2. Now, once again, we go counterclockwise. Quadrant 2 is going to be any set of ordered pairs that are negative positive. So my first number tells me to run backwards, so it's negative, and then I still jump up because the second number is positive. Then we go into my quadrant, quadrant 3. That's going to be any ordered pair that is negative, negative, which means I'm going to run to the left, and then I'm going to jump down. And then finally, we have quadrant 4. Once again, these are Roman numerals for our numbers, and that is any ordered pair that is going to be positive, negative, which tells me that I'm going to run forward, but I'm going to jump down because it is negative. So when I'm plotting these things, then once again, I'm going to have 2 points, and it's going to tell me to either move forward or backwards, and then up or down, and then I put my point. Just because there are 2 numbers doesn't mean I put 2 points. I only put 1 point for each of my ordered pair. Now, if I have something that's going to be on an axis, right? So our 2 axes are x and y. If it's going to be on the x or it's going to be on the y, then one of those numbers has to be a 0, and that's what your second chart is. But if I have a 7, 0, that tells me I'm going to run forward 7, and then I'm going to stay. So that 0 says we're going to be on the axis. If it's a 0 in the second number, then it's going to be on the x-axis because the x-axis is the only one that's moving. If I have one that starts with a 0 and then I have a second number, either up or down, then that tells me that it is going to be on the y-axis because the 0 tells me I'm not running forward or backwards. I'm simply, in this case, jumping up. So if there's a 0 followed by a second number, then I know it's going to be on the y-axis. So that's what the second chart is all about. If I want it to be on the x-axis and I have a positive number, then I know I'm going to go forward and then I'm going to stop. So it's going to be on the x-axis because my second number has to be a 0. If I'm going to be on the y-axis, and I know that it's going to be a 0 as my x, so I'm not going forward or backwards, so that tells me I'm not going to run, then I'm going to put a positive for my second one, because we'll see in a moment that the other one is negative. But I would jump straight up, so that was the 0, 5. If I want it to be on the x-axis but be negative, then my first number has to be negative and to the left, so it'll stay on the x-axis, but then I would just stop and not jump up or down, therefore my y is a 0. And then if I want it to be on the y-axis but in the lower region, then once again, on the y-axis, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to run forward or backwards. I'm simply going to jump down to my negative numbers. So when we to plotting then is just going through these processes and then figuring out where these mixed numbers, these rational numbers would lie on a particular graph. It says identify the quadrant in which this point's going to be. So my ordered pair tells me it's a negative, then a positive. So we know we're running backwards and then we're jumping up. And as we can see on the image on the right, anything that is a negative followed by a positive, that is going to be in quadrant 2. So when I think about my XY axes, the X coordinate is negative, so I ran backwards, and the Y coordinate is positive, so therefore I jump up, and that's why it is in quadrant 2. So what about the next one then? Well, on the next one, it says identify the quadrant in which the point negative 2 1/2, negative 2 1/2 would be located. So as I'm looking at my chart, and it says where that's going to be, then hopefully I can see that that's going to be in quadrant 3. Negative, negative is always going to be in quadrant 3. All right. So now when I look at this one, it says identify the axes in which the point 0 2/5 is located. So I have to tell which axis it's going to be on. Is it going to be on the X axis or is it going to be on the Y axis? So I ask myself, am I moving for my first number? What does the X tell me to do? Well, it's 0, so I don't do anything, right? So I'm not going to go forward. I'm not going to go backwards. Therefore, if I have 2/5, it's positive. I know I'm going to go up, and therefore it has to be on the Y axis. Notice what this says, that we have a non-zero value. And all that means is it's any number other than 0, any positive or any negative number. So if my 0 is in my X coordinate, then once again, I know that my non-zero, whatever it's going to be in the Y, is going to be the axis that it is on. So if I'm looking at the idea of that non-zero and I apply that to the next one, the check, then we should be able to quickly determine which axis this ordered pair is going to be on. So you give that one a shot. Let's see how you do. So hopefully you thought, well, the top one is a 0 and the non-zero number is in my Y, so it had to be on the Y axis. Well, therefore, if I switch the idea and my non-zero is my X and my 0 is my Y, so I'm not jumping up or down, then it has to be on the X axis. Yes? Hopefully you got it. If you didn't, then let me know where your confusion just might be. All right, so then as we're moving on, it says that there's an animation on the digital copy of the book if you would like to look at it, but it's basically explaining how we plot things, right? So as we've gone over this several times now, when it comes to plotting things and figuring out what ordered pairs are, then I always want to look at my X first, followed by my Y. If I'm going to plot it, I know my X tells me to go forward or backwards, and then my Y tells me to jump up or down. If I need to find the ordered pair on this coordinate plane, such as this is telling me to do, then I still want to find my X first, followed by my Y. So going from my point of origin, going from my 0, 0, where am I going to go? Hopefully you're saying, well, I'm going to go to the left, right? So if I'm going to go to the left, I see how many I'm going to go to the left, and that says -3. So I know in my ordered pair, once again, I have to have parentheses, an X, a comma, a Y in parentheses. So when I know that my first number is -3, and then I find my second number, am I jumping up or down? I'm jumping up, so it's positive, and I'm jumping up to what? 4. Then I know that my Y has to be a +4. So when I look at my ordered pair, it says the ordered pair point therefore is -3, +4. Notice the beginning and ending parentheses. Notice the comma in the middle. If you don't have the parentheses and the comma, then it's simply going to be wrong, because then you would just have -34. That's not what we're talking about. So now we look at the idea of identifying ordered pairs, and we have multiple different points to try to confuse us. So I just need to focus in on the D. So I'm going to make that a bigger dot so I can see exactly what I'm talking about. Now, as I'm doing my assignments, that I need to make sure that I notice what the unit measurements are actually equal to. So when we talk about a unit, once again, we're just talking about one line or actually a block on a coordinate plane. Then I have to figure out what their measurement is equal to. Notice that I have a line and then a +1, and then a line and then a +2. So that should tell us that each of these is actually worth a half or 0.5, right? So when I say that I'm going to go from my point of origin, 0, 0, and I'm going to move forward, and I ask, well, how many units am I going forward? I am moving to the right 3 units. That's going to be on the x-axis. But then when I stop and I look at what that measurement is, I need to know what that point is going to be representing. So instead of 3, it's actually going to be equal to 1.5. Now you can put 1.5, or if you prefer to put 1.5, I don't care which one you put. It's up to you if you prefer decimals or if you prefer fractions. I'm fine as long as you have the right value. From my x, then, I can see that I'm going to jump down. Well, how many units am I jumping down? I'm jumping down 2 units. So what is that value? What number does that line up to? Well, that lines up to -1. So when we look at our ordered pair, as the book is telling you for D, it is in the ordered pair of 1.5, -1. Notice it has a beginning and ending parentheses, and it has a comma separating the two numbers. So when I look at the idea of all right, so I would like you to look at B, see if you can figure out the ordered pair for those, keeping in mind that these are still going to be half units. Figure out what the ordered pair is, come back and check your work. All right, so hopefully you did it and you did it correctly. For B then, I want to make it a little bit bigger so we can tell what we're looking at. We're going to start once again at the center, my point of origin at 0, 0. And then I'm running backwards. I'm running to the left. 1, 2, it looks like 3 units. Well, once again, that's going to be a -1.5 or 1.5. Then I'm going to jump straight down, and that's also going to be a negative, because notice that this is in quadrant 3. So if I'm going down 1, 2, the -1. So my ordered pair is -1.5, comma, -1 inside of parentheses. Or if you want to do the -1.5 and -1 inside of parentheses, that's fine as well. All right, so when we start looking at everything they're asking us to do, it says to identify now, if I give you the ordered pair, which point we're talking about. Now, if I think, all right, so I have a negative and then a positive. I know that all negative and positives are going to be in quadrant 2. That should be pretty easy. Or we can just go ahead and plot it and figure it out by starting at the 0, 0, and I'm going to go -2, so I'm going to go 2 to the left, and then +4, so I'm going to jump straight up to 4, and that's still going to be in quadrant 2, which is the letter P. Pretty easy? I'm hoping so. Identify the point located at -2, then 1/2. So -2, then 1/2. Once again, that's a negative followed by a positive. So hopefully I know that's going to be in quadrant 2. And there's only one letter or one point in quadrant 2. But once again, these are half units or half measurements. So I know that I'm going to move to the left. How many units? Well, I'm going to go 3, 4 total units. So when I know I'm going 4 total units, then that is actually a -2, right, on the x-axis. And then when I move up, I'm going up just 1. Well, that's not a full number, right? That's a half. So that means I'm going to go up 1 unit, and therefore it's going to be, as it shows you, -2, 1/2 for my ordered pair. All right, These should be pretty easy. I want you to try this one. All right, so plotting this one, hopefully you started at your point of origin, as we always do. We're going to go forward a half, which means we're going to go forward 1 unit, since these are half measurement units. And then it says -2, so hopefully you thought, oh, I'm jumping down. That's got to be in quadrant 4. Tells me to jump down to the -2, and that's going to give me point S. Pretty easy, right? I'm hoping. All right, so now it says you can graph a point on the or on the coordinate plane, excuse me, using your x and y coordinates. So you're going to graph. That means you're going to put a point and then you're going to label it. That way, if we do multiple points on the same graph, we know which one we're talking about. So we're going to use an A. So it says -4, +3. So hopefully in your mind you're thinking that's got to be quadrant 2 because it's a negative positive. So I'm going to start at my point of origin. I'm going to go backwards to the -4. I'm going to jump up to the 3. Notice I haven't put any points yet. Then I put my point. So that is -4, +3. I'm going to label it with an A. That's it. That's all there is to it. Pretty easy, I would hope. All right. So now it says that we're going to do -2 1/2. We're going to do -3 1/2 and explain how you do it. So it's important that we can explain, and that's what these words are that we're going to be filling in at the bottom. That's our explanation. Once again, make sure you notice on the graph that these are half units. So therefore, when it tells me to go to a half, I have to go halfway between, when it comes to the x, the 2 and the 3. So -2 1/2 tells me I have to go beyond the 2 and then not quite to the 3. So the line in between. The next one is negative, so I'm going to go down, this time 3 1/2. So I'm going to go between the -3 and the -4. Hadn't put a point yet, but once I get to my second coordinate, then I can put my point, and I label it an N. You will have to explain how to plot points on your assignments and on your upcoming tests. So that's what these type of sentences are for. The x-coordinate is negative, so you're going to move blank units left. So we had to go how many units left? Well, that would be 5 because it was 2 1/2. Next, since the y-coordinate is negative, then we have to move blank units down. Well, in that case, we had to go 7 down because each one is a half, and we had to get to -3 1/2. So that would be my explanation. And then we label it. We have an N. Hopefully nothing difficult for you. So I would like you to do this one. Give it a shot. Come back and check. All right. So hopefully you notice that we have half units. Hopefully you notice over to the left it says explain how you did it. So we're going to start at the middle. We're going to go to our point of origin. And we're going to go which direction first? Well, 4.5 tells me I'm going to go forward. Well, how many units? Well, they're half units, so I have to go forward 9 units to the 4.5. I don't put a point. I'm going to then look at where my y-axis is, and it's at -1, so I have to go down 2 units, and then I can put my point to match up at -1. I want to label it, so it tells me that M, notice that the letter that's identifying the point is right in front of the ordered pair. And then I'm going to explain how I did it. I'm going to explain exactly what I just said. So starting at the origin, you're going to run forward on the x-axis 9 different units. Then you're going to drop down the y-axis 2 different units. You're going to add a point, and then you're going to label it, which is exactly what I said when I was doing it. Now this one gets a little trickier. We have 4 different points. We have words, which some of us want to make confusing. Don't let it allow yourself to be confusing. But notice the unit measurements we have on this graph. That's different than what we've seen before. So let's first start with what it says. The table shows the locations for several different places around town. The grid shows a map of the town, and each square on the grid represents one city block. Ben needs to go to the dry cleaner, which is 3 blocks west and 5 blocks north of the library. Where on the grid should he go? So when I start looking at all these different points, right, we have 4 different points, but we know where we need to go and that we need to start at the library. So when I start looking at all these points on our coordinate plane, then it might help to notice which ones are which. It's also important to understand that each of these are 1/4 measurements, right? So if I have 1/4, 2 of them make a half, 3 of them is 3/4, and then 4 makes a whole. So when I start looking at where these units are in comparison, I know that 4 of them is going to give me 1 whole. So when I start looking at all of these different points, I see that I have the bank, the grocery, the library, the post office. So if I want to figure out where it is that we're talking about, then I know for 1 whole that that's 4 different units, and then the 1/4. So I would need to go to the right 5 different units and then jump down 4 different units. So if I go forward 5 and down 4, then I know that one has to be the bank. I don't need that one. What about the grocery store? Well, it says it's -3/4 and 0. So -3/4 means I have to go to the left first because X tells me to run. And then the 0 means it's going to be on the X axis. So 3/4, I know that I need to go 3 different units and then put my point. So that's my grocery store. And I don't need that one either. When I go to the library, then it says 0, so I'm not going to go forward or backwards. I'm just going to simply drop down 3/4, and then that's going to be my library. That's the one I need. But just in case you're wondering, for the post office, if I want to go back to the -1 and jump up 5 to the +1 and 1/4, then that is going to be the post office. Now, it says we need to go to the dry cleaner, which is 3 blocks west and 5 blocks north. Well, how do I know the difference between north and west and east and all? Well, when I'm looking at where I'm going, I look at what is called the compass rose. So I'm going to start at the library and I am going to go 3 blocks west and then 5 blocks north of the library itself. So 3 blocks, so that's my different units. I'm going to go to the left. So when I go to the left 3 blocks, then I know that I'm going to use my compass rose because it's west. And so I'm going to go left and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. So that takes me to the 3/4 mark. And then I have to do 5 blocks north. So when I count 5 blocks north, once again, north on my compass rose is straight up. So I'm going to count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I can put my point. Once I put my point, then I know that that is where my dry cleaners is. So I would label it DC for dry cleaners. All right, makes sense? That one's a little different, I know, but I think you got it. But make sure you write down these steps so you know exactly how to do things when it comes to things like your assignment. All right, so I want you to give this one a try, and I'm going to tell you right now, you can have a hint. These are the same coordinates and locations, so just use the map that we just did. It's asking you to figure out that if the table shows these locations for these 4 places around town, that we need to look at where Yamana, don't know why you would name your kid that, wants to go to the farmer's market, which is 6 blocks east and 2 blocks south of the post office. So go ahead and plot it, then go ahead and write the ordered pair to let me know where it would be. All right, so hopefully we looked at what was important, knowing that we're going to the farmer to market and we're starting from the post office. And if you use the same map, then I'm just going to overlay that on here so we already know what it is that we're talking about. Once again, each of these are worth 1/4, so when I'm figuring out my ordered pair at the end, I need to understand that I could have a 1/4, a 1/2, or a 3/4. So when I'm looking at my compass rose once again, and it's telling me to go east and then south, I need to know where I'm starting, which is the post office. That's quadrant 2, where the P is. And I have to follow those directions. So 6 blocks east of the post office. East, as we can see on our compass rose, is to the right. So I have to go 6 blocks to the east. So that's going to take me there. And then it says 2 blocks south. And south is at the bottom of my compass rose. So I have to go down. How many? 2. So then I put my point. Now, once I put a point on a graph, then I also want to label it. This we're going to label FM for farmer's market. Now, what would the ordered pair be when it comes to plotting this? So we went forward 2 from the point of origin, and then up 3, and each of these are worth 1/4 when it comes to our units. So our ordered pair is going to be a positive 1/2 and a positive 3/4 because we're going forward and jumping up. All right, so go ahead and work on your assignment. We're going to have the evens 2 through 14 on the front, and then on the back 16 and 18. If you have questions while you're working on it, just please come and ask.